say hi to your friends and peers from across the industry. We have the magnificent Mike Costio and the fabulous Claire Conan with us to talk about the state of the menu today. So we do this session basically once a year. It's sort of a retrospective review of what's happened on menus over the prior year, and also sort of our forward-looking thoughts too, as what this means for the future of trends on the menu and pricing and all these things that we tend to care about. The debate we've always had is, do we want to show the same types of metrics year after year after year, so that's something that's quite repeatable, or do we try to focus on things that are a little bit more story-driven about things that are particularly interesting that we're seeing? And I think we sort of landed a little bit somewhere in the middle. So we're going to provide some of the basic stat updates that maybe you've come to expect from us, and also show you some new things that we've discovered that we think are pretty worthwhile and we should all be thinking about. So with that in mind, I guess I have this standard disclaimer every time. I actually realize now that this screenshot is well over 3 years old. I should probably update it with, this is like the most outdated thing you'll ever see from us. It's a 3-year-old screenshot, which basically says you should have some option. It might not look exactly like this in Zoom anymore. There's some option in Zoom where you could choose who you want to chat with. Make sure you're chatting with everybody. So when you hit the chat button and you say something brilliant, witty, funny, friendly, whatever, it's not just Mike, Claire, and I seeing it. It's the entire community of your friends and peers from across the industry. So if you haven't done that yet, make sure you do that. And I thought maybe we could start with sort of a provocative question I would like all of you to answer. What do you think is the top food city in the US? And here's the deal. So when you hit chat, mention where you're based out of, and then what do you think is the top food city? And you cannot choose your own, right? We don't want a lot of people just like self-voting. So if you're from Chicago, you can't pick Chicago. And when we say food city, we mean sort of like broad metro area. So I mean like Los Angeles, and I don't mean like, Santa Monica or something that small. Sort of like big, big city concept or US metro area. So let's give everyone maybe like 45 seconds, a minute. Where are you chatting in from? And what do you think is the top food city? And after you punch that in, if you feel like doing so, if you want to explain why you think your vote is the #1 vote, that would be interesting too. Mike, Claire, we have some very, very well-informed and invested folks in this audience when it comes to, foodieism. What are we seeing the real professionals cast their vote toward?
It's all over the place. I mean, the ones you would think: New York, Chicago, LA, but some
also
interesting
like Seattle
ones too.
is in here,
Yeah.
like some
New Orleans,
small towns.
Portland, Hershey, hi from Hershey, Pennsylvania. I thought somebody would say Hershey, which they have a great chocolate scene. There's no doubt about it. But
so all the big cities, pretty much.
I mean, all the major ones.
Anything like remotely near a consensus?
No, not at all.
Okay, so the reason why I ask is I'm curious to see what everyone thinks, and I'm glad no one voted for themselves. But we saw this thing yesterday from a company called Wallet Hub, and I guess they use some public data and some of their own credit card scanning, because they help you figure out what credit cards to use. And they came up with what, in my mind, is like an extraordinarily dumb list of the top US food cities. This list actually made me slightly angry. So let me ask you, did we see many Orlandos on that list? Great city, but
do we think that includes like Disney?
do we see many Orlandos on that list?
I don't know if I saw any Orlandos originally. There's definitely people.
How many people put Sacramento as their top food city?
There were a couple Sacramentos. I swear I saw them come through.
They must have seen the Wallet Hub article then. Yeah, they must have stayed. But there's just a lot of ridiculousness on this list. I mean, I'm sorry, like Sacramento is wonderful. It's not like the third best food city in America. And I'm in Florida, and I can tell you, no matter where you are in Florida, outside of Miami, the food's way better in New York and in LA and whatnot. And you look at the methodology that was used. So part of it is just like affordability index. I get that. Then they have this thing called diversity, accessibility, and quality. And it's based on things like Yelp ratings and whatnot. But you realize when it comes to something like a Yelp rating, you actually have to sort of normalize that to the area, right? Like if you're in a town that has like one Indian restaurant and it's decent, there's a pretty good chance it's going to be rated close to 5 stars because it's the only option. But that same Indian restaurant might be like a 3.5, 4-star restaurant in New York or some other place with a lot of different options. And I think that wasn't accounted for. I bring this up because there actually is, in our view, almost an empirically more accurate, most accurate answer to this question of what are the top food cities. And we actually wrote on this a few months ago, just a couple of months ago. Data Central unveils those food forward cities lists across the US. And I'd like to sort of share with you what those cities are and the rationale for how we got to them. So the next time anyone asks like, hey, what are the #1 foodie cities or most food forward cities in the country? You actually have, in our mind, a fairly definitive answer. So here's our top 10. The numbers you see here are rankings. These are metro areas across the US. So you could be ranked anywhere from like 1 to like 160 or 170, there's depending on how many metros there are that we included in our sample over here. But here's the top 10 overall. And there's 3 different measures. One is something we call the race to 90. That question is, how many different cuisine types does it require in that particular metro area before you'd get to 90% of all the restaurants, right? So in a really diverse place like New York or LA or Miami, you need a whole lot of cuisine types. You got to have a little Chinese, a little Indian, a little American, a little Brazilian, a little Peruvian, like little bits and bits before you get to 90% of all the restaurants. In some other places, you get to 90% really fast. You have American pizza, barbecue, and like not much else, right? You get to 90% pretty quick. So these are the rankings. Miami is the most diverse in that measure, and you can see the rankings for the other ones in the top 10 overall. Then you have ethnic restaurant diversity, which is what is the proportion of ethnic restaurants compared to all restaurants in that area. And we found that ethnic restaurant diversity is positively correlated with many other things that are predictive of, let's say, food forwardness among consumers. The third is consumer trend knowledge. So we have an awesome data set that we call Flavor, which takes all the different things you could eat or drink, foods, beverages, ingredients, healthy terms, you name it, and continuously polls consumers across the country down to the zip code. Have they tried that thing before? Do they know what it is? Have they ever heard of it? Do they like it? Do they not like it? How many times have they had it before? And we can actually measure consumer trend knowledge of all like the new up and coming trends down to the zip code and then reaggregate them at the city level. So what you see over here is, which are the places where consumers, the people themselves, are most familiar with up and coming trends in food. And San Francisco is #1 on that list. You take them all together, you get an average, and you get a final ranking. And this is ours: San Francisco, LA, Miami, DC, San Diego make our top 5, and you can see the rest of the top 10. Like this list looks pretty good to me. So if you have a top 10, you of course by definition would have to have a bottom 10 as well. And I think these are hard places to guess because they're generally not, big cities. But here's what the bottom 10 looks like. And if you're ever asked, like to assemble a dine around or a food tour or pick a city to go to and try all the cuisine to get like an experience of, what all the latest food trends are, I would stick with the cities on the left and not book your food tour in the cities on the right, where there's just a lot less of that diversity and consumer knowledge, frankly. So again, I think that Wallet Hub list was totally absurd. It actually hurt my feelings to see that a little bit. And I think this list is a whole lot better. And if you disagree with this, you are free to use chat and argue with our rankings. So that said, we have some great new stuff in Report Pro, some brand new reports published in just the last couple of weeks. I don't even know what our count is now, maybe 1,500 reports in Report Pro on everything you can imagine. We all know how important sandwiches are in the American diet. So we have a great new short read on sandwich trends. Make sure to check that out. There are some really awesome sandwiches in there. as well as a quick read on fall trends as well. And Claire, you might actually be a good person to ask. Are we seeing like an early or late arrival of pumpkin spice this year?
I've not dug into it. I think, Mike, you even visited it a little bit, perhaps in this or another report, but it does look like it's still leaning early, but it's not like drastically swinging that way.
Yeah, there were already some introductions in early August of this year. Like last year, they actually did that. Like Starbucks was a little later than it normally is last year, but this year they bumped it up a few days again. But now it's really the retail side. I mean, we see CPG, some of the pumpkin stuff on shelves in June and July now.
Yeah, restaurants lead retail in terms of trends. And I think what you'd said last year, Mike, was that pumpkin spice was still huge, but we saw many other chains start leaning more heavily into apple as a fall flavor.
Yeah.
Has that continued?
Yeah, absolutely. Apple, caramel apple, really big, and blood orange is kind of coming up.
And I was just digging into
orange
the cold beverage versus hot, and like the apple, apple and blood orange are so much happier with the cold beverage versus hot, which tends to be like people wait for the pumpkin in the fall.
Wait, blood orange is a fall seasonal thing?
Oh, because it's blood, it's something that's
like
the color is spooky. Yeah, it's great to put on an October.
So people actually make the blood association with Halloween? Really?
I mean, I think that's what the operators are doing. Absolutely.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Cool. All right. And then a report on entertainment as well. This looks like a totally posed, inauthentic picture to me. But can you tell us like sort of what is in that entertainment segment that's different than what we saw with, bowling alleys in the past and whatnot?
I don't think either of us worked on this report, so.
Well, I mean, based on the callouts, we have to address pickleball, which did not exist really as a giant entertainment concept pre-pandemic. So that was specifically explored.
I would like everyone's opinion on pickleball, actually. So I was in LA. I've been in LA a couple of times in the last few months. I have the friend that I stay with there. He loves pickleball. Like he lives for it. And you drive around the city and there's literally pickleball everywhere. I mean, every tennis court is now a pickleball court, and they're packed with people waiting to play and whatnot. I think it's okay. I mean, it's like sort of fun, I guess. I guess I would ask, why is it so incredibly popular? Is it just in places like LA, or is this like a national thing? Because I don't see it much here where I am in Florida. A little bit, but not like LA.
It's pretty national. I mean, and in the comments, you can see lots of people who liked racket sports first wish that you would do squash or racquetball instead. But like pickleball has been like in high school, it was a sport my high school offered, which tells you a lot about my high school. We were a nerdy high school, and it's an easy to play game. I can't imagine, the report probably mentions, but I can't imagine we can maintain that many pickleball chains. Someone will win, right?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
Is it popular partly because the name is so silly and that's made it fun with this generation?
Certainly at least in Kansas City. I don't know about other places. Like there's like chicken and pickle, like so it's fun. You can do pickle, chicken, Southern sandwich themed situations. So I think there's some of that.
And then I guess the other question is, will this last? I mean, what was the last sport that was sort of introduced that's really had staying power? Like, what was the last time we introduced sort of a new sport that stuck around for decades versus fizzled out? I don't know, maybe someone in chat can answer that question. So I think it's been a long time, right? So what are the odds that pickleball is really going to be the one? I don't know. Okay.
We definitely have the infrastructure, yeah.
Well, you can read all about it in many of the reports in Report Pro. You'll also see we have some international research built into Report Pro now as well. Come ask us about that if you'd like to get access. And again, there's brand new stuff every other day. Claire, Mike, the entire content team here do just a fabulous job highlighting, I think, all the things you need to know. And the thing about Report Pro is it's so broad now. It's not just a series of reports. It's almost like a search engine in a way. If you want to look something up on a topic, you just type it in the search and you'll find what you need to answer pretty much any question you might have around food or food service. All right, so Mike, let's do a little segue into what's new in the industry. So Mike is taking it upon himself to preview for us some of the latest things that are happening. Mike?
Yeah, so just some of the fun, innovative stuff that's happening in our industry. And I think a lot of us probably saw this. So I think it's kind of hard to escape the news of, Taylor Swift possibly dating Travis Kelce. And so she was at the football game on Sunday, and somebody had taken a paparazzi photo of what she was eating. And somebody on Twitter, or what's now called X, had said, it looks like she's eating chicken nuggets, ketchup, and seemingly ranch. And people just went crazy over that phrasing of seemingly ranch. And so you saw the Empire State Building was lit up in seemingly ranch colors. You saw Spirit Halloween was doing seemingly ranch costumes. But I think Heinz kind of won the whole kind of media hoopla with an actual product that they're releasing, 100 bottles. They already make a mayo chup, or a ranch ketchup cranch combination. So it's something that they already had in their product line. So they just kind of have to slap a new label on there, but they have a ketchup and seemingly ranch bottle that's going to be released that you can actually purchase. So I think it's a really good example of a brand that kind of has their finger on the pulse and that has, a marketing team that can really act quickly and act within, the confines of their organization, work with other teams and come out with something really quickly.
Yeah, so I would challenge, I guess, folks in chat. I don't really personally understand why she's so insanely popular right now, and her movie is like had the highest pre-sale, or concert movies had the highest pre-sales for a theater run of any movie ever. Something totally absurd. Is there a practical, like logical, well-reasoned reason that she is this insanely popular today that is not due to mind control in some way? Like, this feels like a giant brainwashing operation to me. Like, maybe not deliberately. That's what a lot of marketing sort of is in some way. But can anyone explain why and give a practical reason? Or is it really just marketing slash?
I'm going to reveal myself as a serious Swiftie. Like, I saw her in 2007 or so. When she's pretty talented, and people, like, she doesn't swear a lot until recently in songs, so you can listen with your kids. I think there's more than just marketing.
But look at what you just said. You said, yeah, she's sort of talented. She doesn't swear too much. I mean, you didn't say
I was in one of the top percent of
time.
Taylor Swift listeners last year, and people listen to a lot of Taylor Swift, so I certainly think it's good. But
her fans are fanatical, right? Not like,
there's always someone who has big fans. I don't know. Every generation needs a big person to watch. Why not her?
I think there's an interesting research study here as to what's created this mania. So maybe it'll be like the tulip craze or something. Okay. What is this, Mike?
And so this actually comes from the mid-year trend report section that we did on kind of micro trends and fads. And I think sometimes you see things like that, craft seemingly ranch, option there. And you think, okay, that's a fad, it's going to come and go. And that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's not some play that there's that, some reason to kind of get in on the zeitgeist. So actually 67% of consumers say that they want to see more of these short-term trends or fads at restaurants and retail. So they want to experience them. They see them on TikTok. They see them on, Instagram. They want to try them. They want to try them, at retail and at restaurants. So if there's, a kind of a place for your brand to play, I think you should, play that hand, definitely.
Yeah, we used to get asked the question all the time, how do you distinguish between a fad and a trend? And the connotation is that, trends are good and fads are bad. I think we're long past that now, right? So I would reframe fad as more of a micro trend, and that they're worth pursuing today, whereas maybe 10 years ago, you wanted to ignore them.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, if you go into that flavor database that you were talking about, Jack, and I won't name any brand names, but you can sort it on awareness by generations. And it's interesting to, sort it on what Gen Z knows and doesn't know when it comes to brands. There are some brands that we're all familiar with that Gen Z is very unfamiliar with. So it definitely is important to make sure, that you're staying in front of consumers, and particularly younger consumers, just for the longevity of your brand.
It's true. Foods too. There's some foods that every boomer knows and very few Gen Zers have ever heard of, and vice versa as well. So. Okay, what is this? McDonald's.
McDonald's is releasing, it's actually next Monday these are coming out. These are new limited time sauces. And I think they're just pretty interesting sauces that they're releasing. The first one is a sweet and spicy jam, which is kind of a take on like a red pepper jam, but it's specifically geared towards breakfast. So, they're saying you can put it on their breakfast sandwiches or dip the hash browns into it. So it's their first ever breakfast sauce launch. But I think the really interesting one is the Mambo sauce, which I think is probably pretty unfamiliar to a lot of the country, unless you live in Washington, D.C. or Chicago, so we have a number of Mambo, whatever you want to say, sauce brands here in Chicago. You find it all the time in D.C. It's kind of like a sweet and spicy and sour take on like a barbecue sauce. And so they took that regional flavor and now they're introducing it nationally across the country. We've covered this sauce a few times in Dine Around Washington, D.C. issues. I think the last time was 2020. And I want to say it was like 32% of consumers said that they wanted to try it at that time. So just interesting. They're kind of taking a chance on a really regional flavor and launching it nationally.
That's good. And I think it's great. And I think it's sort of brave too, because there's not like there's much opportunity to explain the sauce to the consumer if you're McDonald's, right? There's not room on the menu board or anything to explain what it is. You just have to go for it. That's great.
And I see, on this next one too, it's also a really, good example of kind of leaning into what you're known for, what people get excited about. They were really good about, releasing that Rick and Morty sauce, a few years ago, and everybody went crazy for it. They saw how well that did. And so they're leaning into that. So I think we're seeing a number of brands do that. And kind of on that is, so this week is My Panera Week, which is kind of a week of, deals and kind of launches for My Panera loyalty program consumers. And we saw this, I think it was kind of Amazon with their deal days where, if you're a Prime member, you get access to these deal days. And then we saw other operators really jumping on that. So this week is Target Circle Week. And we haven't necessarily seen it in food service as much, but I think that's starting to change. I think we're going to see a lot more of these kind of loyalty program deal weeks. I think a number of supermarkets are looking into it right now. So, if you do have a loyalty program, I think this is kind of a great way to get people excited over the course of a day or week or however long it is.
Do you think they'll do the Amazon Go thing where you could just walk into Panera, take a sandwich, and just walk out?
And just walk out? Yeah, probably at some point. I mean, I think they were doing they have that subscription drink service, and they did a deal on it for the first day for $5 for a month. So it's actually a pretty good deal. If you don't follow her on Instagram, she's absolutely amazing. She's a pastry chef / architect named Dinara Costco, and she does these really architecturally interesting cakes and sweets and pastries. And so this was something that she did with So Good Magazine, where they were putting prompts into AI and taking whatever AI spat out and then actually making cakes from them. So you can see the two things on the left-hand side here are what AI came up with. Specifically, Midjourney came up with these. And then the two larger images are the actual cakes that she made from those. But I think a lot of times, AI tends to give us some pretty weird out there, answers or images, and we kind of reject those. But I think, the idea of, taking kind of those weird, interesting kind of over the top images and, deciding, what can I do with this? Maybe let it expand my thinking is, something that more food companies should be doing.
Awesome. And then what is this over here?
And that, so I know. I had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago to the Oregon Hazelnut Board had a tour. And so I had this opportunity to go to Oregon and learn about hazelnuts. And I haven't shut up about hazelnuts for the past 2 weeks because it really is an absolutely fascinating industry. So I would just give 3 interesting facts that I learned about hazelnuts on this tour. Number 1 is that, so I guess I'll do a quiz. So America is the 3rd largest hazelnut producing country. Italy is number 2. Can anybody guess what the number 1 hazelnut producing country in the world is? And Claire can't answer because I've talked about this constantly and she already knows what it is. And it's by a lot. It's not even close. They are far and away the number 1 producer. I never would have guessed it. A couple people knew in the comments. Do you have any idea, Jeff?
I have no idea.
It's Turkey. So Turkey actually produces over 60% of the world's hazelnut production. So I thought that was super interesting.
Wait, if they make 60% of the world's hazelnuts, how could they only be number 3?
No, Turkey is number 1. We're
number 1. Oh, I see.
Italy is number 2. Yeah, exactly. So, and we're number 3, and almost all of that is in Oregon itself. So that's pretty much the predominant area. Number 2 is that there are different varieties of hazelnuts, and they do taste different from each other. So you can actually taste them next to each other and kind of taste those differences. Some are more susceptible to blight, and so they're developing a lot of new varietals. Some don't split in half as much because people particularly pastry chefs love those whole hazelnuts. So I thought that was really interesting. And then number 3 is that hazelnuts, they don't shake the trees. They don't hand pick them at all. They literally just let the hazelnuts fall to the ground, and then they scoop them up from the ground. So whereas most nuts or other products that you see are shaken from the trees, or we have to pick them, these just fall to the ground naturally, and then they sweep them up and clean them off, and we eat them. So when we were there, it was actually hazelnut harvesting season, and there were mounds of hazelnuts in the fields wherever we went.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And then the second day of that tour, we went to the Oregon Food Innovation Center, which is in Portland, which is absolutely fantastic if you ever have a chance to go there. And they have this wall of products that they came up with. So it's taking, the things that they grow in Portland or in Oregon and actually coming up with value-added products. And the Oregon Peanut Commodity Board is actually housed there too. So there's a bunch of different potato commodity board is there. So there's a bunch of different potato-based products. But this was the most interesting, I thought, which is the pickled potato product. So they called them tater picks. And it's literally, you can see them in the jar. They're just pickled potatoes with some other flavors in a jar. I believe they're raw in there as well. So they still have that crunch to them. So
yeah, I would try it. And how about this one?
And then the very last one, I mean, I know we're talking about Halloween, but, it's already time to start talking. But the holidays, and we already see a number of Halloween countdown or advent calendars being launched. But so all of the Christmas and, holiday-driven ones are coming out, and they're really unusual varieties this year. So we're seeing a number of brands doing it. This is Stouffer's. They're doing a frozen one. So it's 7 different frozen meals inside in a countdown calendar here. They actually made sure that these were, would fit in your freezer. They knew people might not want to put 7 into their freezer. So I think we're going to see a lot more unusual, countdown calendars this year. I also think there's an opportunity on the food service side to do something to get people in the stores as well. Maybe do one of those subscription services where if you come in every day for a week, we'll give you a little surprise or something.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Mike. And you're going to stick around for commentary. Claire, we're going to pivot to you and talk about the state of the menu and what we're finding in menu trends. So I think the first thing we have up is just our menus getting bigger, smaller. Where are we today?
Yep, and that the prior slide was to let people know the source of all of this is our menu trends database. So we're using that to determine what's happening on menus, unsurprisingly. So for the menu size, we started state of the menu after you see that gigantic dip after COVID. And so last year we found that we're recovering, and I'm pleased to report, as I think we all know, we are still recovering, and there's been an increase year over year.
Yeah, so we're not nearly the same. Menus aren't nearly as large as they used to be.
No, they're not. And we will be digging into that and a little bit what's driving that in the next couple of slides.
Okay.
So I wanted to break into what's happening specifically at different segments. So what we're seeing is, you can see here that the dips that happened in 2021, and then you can see, and we'll explore it a little bit coming up as far as how much things have recovered in some cases. And that is on the next slide. But the biggest one here, and some of that's driving less, we saw an evening out in the prior slide. And then you see that huge dip for fine dining. And it really doesn't seem like they have any intent on trying to go back to those big menus. They discovered something that works a little bit better for them, and they're continuing to figure out what it is, their role in the industry. So that menu size is still staying down.
And just to clarify for everyone, by menu size, we mean the number of different items on a menu, right? Does that include beverages or
so this is items
lists?
per menu? over, so it's the number of items on your menu over the number of menus. And in this case, I did not include catering because that can, if someone introduces a huge catering menu, it can kind of muck up the data a bit. And I did not include alcoholic beverage because the
wine lists will
are
totally
enormous, and that's an entirely different presentation.
Okay, so, and we're seeing across all segments a decline following COVID. The decline was most mild in QSR and fast casual and most severe in fine dining. And fine dining is the one that is least sort of recovered, I guess. And your view is that fine dining probably doesn't really intend to. They've just sort of said we're going to go with a smaller menu.
Yeah, in the full report that we'll be releasing soon in Report Pro, you can see some of the item type bases, and there's some strategic shifts that seem to be happening in the item types that they're offering. So I think they're still continuing to refine what they're doing, swapping out desserts. They are the only segment, if memory serves, that's actually increasing their desserts per menu. So that's something they can differentiate on, and so that seems to be a focus area for them.
Could any of this be for fine dining that a lot of them maybe just no longer offer lunch and they become dinner only places, or is that sort of taken care of in this data already?
I did look at by day part, specifically by cuisine, and actually all of those separate day parts are down across all segments. So that wouldn't be driving fine dining's decline specifically, or lack of recovery, that is.
Interesting. All right, so let's zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight fast casual separately. We'll cover quick service and mid-scale in a little bit here, because fast casual is the only one that has completely reached its 2020 levels. Makes sense. They already had the smallest menus. They didn't really have to streamline much, and they had such a different format. They didn't like completely regroup for. They mostly waited it out, for lack of a better phrasing. So they are back at and actually exceeding by a teeny tiny bit their previous items per menu.
So fast casual menus, and I guess just anecdotally, I think what I've observed at some fast casual chains that maybe they open up initially and they're very focused on a specific type of food item, and that over time they start broadening their menu a little bit and they're not quite as focused.
A little bit. What I did see when I dug into the item type data, which is again a subscription product in that big report, is in the fast casual area specifically, and we're seeing this across menus, is that people are actually leaning into their core. So at fast casual, we're seeing increases in items per menu in sandwiches, as well as Mexican entree, and I believe pizza, if memory serves. And those are all like core fast casual cuisine types. So they seem to be leaning more into that core.
Yeah. So some specific items or dishes?
Yeah, and that said, while they lean into their core, they are also expanding wings. You will see wings a few times in here, and I realize we talked about barbecue chicken wing and Mike's mid-year trends as our big thing, top growing thing past 12 months, but the data says what the data says. And this shows that fast casual is adding more items per menu. Over the past 12 months, this is the top growing by an items per menu standpoint. And it also reminds us that if you didn't previously offer tons of wings, you can be innovative by simply adding barbecue chicken wings, as we saw in the data, or in this case, mild or pepper or hot. The pepper is primarily lemon pepper, but not all. So it's a reminder that you can be innovative without necessarily like really pushing those limits, though we would encourage you to push those limits. If wings are a stretch for your operation to begin with, you probably don't want to get too wacky with the flavors.
So just for everyone, Claire, can we talk about how to read the two types of numbers, the 199 and then the other numbers in blue, what those represent?
They're so the items in blue are the penetration change in that flavor. So did you offer a mild wing last year versus this year? The increases would be now they do offer it. And then the items per menu 12-month growth is the change in the number of wings as an item type offered.
Okay, so like honey wings, for instance, of places in fast casual that offer wings, there's a lot more that now offer a honey wing option.
Exactly.
Okay, and the number at top is just among all fast casual restaurants, or more of them offering wings or not?
Right. It's wings as an item type, the penetration.
Do you have any theories as to what's driving that? Is it that, after all the inflation, things aren't quite as expensive as they used to be? We do have a lot of, I don't know what the right term is, like, we have an industry where chains in particular will see one thing get popular and many of them will sort of jump on the same train, and we know that wings have been doing well as a segment for a while now. Is that sort of like a follow the leader type of thing, or is this really in reaction to
There's some
consumer
of that.
demand?
There was differing in price points. They probably added them when they were super duper cheap during the pandemic. They saw they sold pretty well, and even when they got expensive, the margin was okay enough to keep them. And they're also just a really approachable platform. Like you can put any sauce on them. Fast casual isn't getting too fancy with most of these flavors, but they're just a good format to experiment with flavors.
Yeah, who doesn't love a good wing? And dessert beverages.
Dessert beverages are up. So the other one was our items per menu winner at the fast casual segment. So that's, am I offering, did I already have it or do I have it? And now I'm offering more varieties. This is, did I previously not have it? And now I do. There are more people offering dessert beverages. Dessert beverages is sort of a unique category because it's not necessarily that they never had milkshakes or they didn't have a float, but it was perhaps not found on the dessert menu. So some of these are entirely new items, and some of this is just bringing additional awareness to items that maybe were like buried on a beverage menu or not even noted on the menu as well.
So basically we're saying if you go into a fast casual place now, you have a much better likelihood of having like a really decadent beverage option than you did a year ago or 2 years ago. Or
yeah, or certainly one where they expect you to think of it more as dessert than they've kind of accepted, like, so many of us grab several beverages places, right? You want to have your soda as well as your shake for later, and they're kind of formatting the menu so that it looks like that.
This is a good question for the audience. I mean, imagine that this weird sort of pseudo category that we call dessert beverages, imagine that didn't exist. Would you otherwise classify a milkshake as a dessert, or would you classify it as a beverage if you could choose only one or the other? I'm curious to see what people think. Okay. QSR and mid-scale, Claire.
And this is the same thing we did for fast casual. I wanted to highlight these two because they're almost back to their pre-pandemic levels, but they're not quite there. They're super close. I think the like mid-scale number was like 148 and QSR was, I don't know, 104 or something. We're really, really close. So they are working towards reapproaching the number of items per menu.
So they're close to their pre-COVID highs, basically.
You can see like kind of that peak there. You can see that.
Yeah, and mid-scale tends to have the largest menus overall of any segment. Is that typically true?
I believe that is still true. I'd have to like go back at the chart. Yeah, that's still true and has always been true, even at the peak decline.
Yeah. And we're seeing wings there as well, huh?
Yeah, but you can see these flavors differ, right? Quick service has more of those standalone wing chain operators, so they get a little more innovative with their flavors. So we have even innovative, though, is still stuff we've been talking about for a long time, right? The gold one I think is fun. Some of that is, creative, silly little ways. Maybe they do like gold flakes or like it's just a silly name. Some of that is also like Carolina gold, so like tangy mustard sauce, which is another good option.
And energy drinks.
Yeah, energy drinks were definitely something that when I was starting to do this, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, it was usually like, oh yeah, energy drinks are in the data, but they were growers across so many segments over the past year. And if you like watch social media at all, you would see that shows up. And energy drinks are the top penetration growth item for quick service restaurants. So previously I did not offer it, and now I do. Energy drinks is the winner. I picked, there's a lot of places that actually kind of do this as a big theme, especially like coffee shops. So this is a classic one. The Human Bean, which is such a fun name, is a chain that's grown pretty well in the Oregon area and beyond. They have locations kind of all across the country, but these are some of their fun flavors. So they've got like the green one is a smash melon, a sweet and summery blend of strawberry and watermelon. You can see why they appeal. Like I was working on this and my son came by and he was like, I like the green one. And so you can see even for like a little 3-year-old, like there's visual appeal, and that's how you.
The green one is strawberry and watermelon?
Yep, a smash
Why
melon.
is it green?
I think it's meant to be like Hulk, like smash, like Hulk smash.
Oh, that's why it's green?
I don't know. Why else would it be green? I mean, watermelons are green, but
I don't know about that. Okay. Well, it's funny because usually things sort of get popular in restaurants before they get popular in the store. And I think energy drinks has been like one exception to the rule for a long time. And like, I think maybe a long time ago, we would have thought like, oh, this is probably just like a grocery store thing. It's interesting. Now it's prevalent in restaurants.
Yeah, I would say
all of a
beverages
sudden.
are actually, especially non-alcoholic beverages, are a funny one where flavors will come from restaurants, but the formats often do show up at retail before they're broadly utilized.
I hope that the smash combo of strawberry and watermelon equaling green does not become a long-term trend. That is not, that's like the Taylor Swift thing. It just does not compute for me. More wings. What are we seeing with wings here?
Yeah, just including it. Another key item. Let's talk mixed desserts. Keep us on target.
Okay,
mixed desserts. I admit I go teeny tiny when I do these reports. I will look at as low as 10 restaurants, which is a little controversial, but I do strongly believe that is where trends start. So this is just from like 10 or 11 restaurants, top growing penetration item at mid-scale. But I think it's really an interesting one because mixed dessert is just our fancy word for basically desserts sampler. And I think this one is interesting because you don't actually need to, operationally, it's a little hard to like put a bunch of desserts on a plate, but you don't need to create anything new. And I think there's a lot of times where people they just say no thank you to dessert, especially at like a more mixed mid-scale type occasion or at a place where you're offering new flavors like an Indian restaurant. And so having a dessert sampler can really help you kind of gain that dessert sale and allow people to try stuff maybe they wouldn't have tried otherwise and introduce them to something. And maybe next time each person in the party will order the thing they liked most, or they'll order that to share again.
Does this
Some
feel
people in the comments
like does this feel to you sort of like a recycling of trends? Because I know if we went back, I think maybe 15 years, we saw the mini dessert trend.
I would say
happening.
there's definitely some of that, and there's so many. The 90s and early aughts had some really good food trends, and lots of them are coming back. And I think this is one that really should, like the dessert cart. But like someone mentioned, like it's like a charcuterie situation, right? Here's your dessert charcuterie, sample it, enjoy, share. And I think that's it's coming back a little bit, and it would make sense that it would come back at mid scale, right? Like it's fine dining, maybe they'll do it, but they already did it. They may have never even stopped doing it. So this is a way that it's showing up in other places.
I feel like mid-scale is a segment that didn't really partake in the mini dessert trend so much when it last happened, right?
No, it was probably not, and certainly not. I don't think very much the like global influenced restaurants either.
There's more, I think, fine dining and higher end casual dining restaurants that were doing it. So yeah, eventually it catches on somewhere. So it's like, philosophically, is this an evolution of this trend along the MAC, or is it a recycling of a trend of, like an old fashioned coming back in vogue again?
I'd probably have it be a boomerang trend where I'd have to come up with I'd say next wave in adoption or something.
Interesting.
And then we do this chart every version of it. So we have all the terms we track in menu trends, and there's I meant to look up the exact number. I'm going to go with a gazillion. And the terms I looked to see year over year, are they gaining in penetration, or are they declining in that 12-month span, or are they holding steady? And we'd seen a shift to decline after the pandemic. Then we saw a shift back to gaining, hinting at innovation last year, and we continue to see that pattern. So we have more gainers than decliners.
To be clear, I think, Claire, when we say terms, we mean essentially like different foods, flavors, ingredients,
it's keywords that we use for all of our research, all those charts I show you where it says tahini is up X%.
Yeah. So if you think of all the things that could appear on a menu, Nashville hot chicken, barbecue sauce, you name it, of all those tens of thousands of different things, how many of them actually grew in prominence versus shrank in prominence on menus? And we have more gainers than decliners now by a pretty healthy margin. Following COVID, it was almost all decliners with very few things bucking that trend. And it seems like we're in a period of growth again now, where menus are becoming more flush with just more stuff on them. Is that a way of thinking about this, Claire?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly more growing terms to work with now than there were 2 years ago.
Yeah, and you have it here by category too, right?
Yes, and I did do the by category breakdown, and it really makes sense with everything we've done on all of these webinars that spice would be our top gaining, the one with the most gainers, right? That is the easiest place to do something innovative and in the most approachable way. I put a new spice blend on, I sprinkle something on top of my fries. It's very approachable, and it's also an easy place where old things can become new, right? Like you can always do something new and interesting with rosemary and put it in a new application.
And maybe just put that in a sentence. Could we say that 68% of spices are gaining on menus while 30% are declining? Is that the way to read this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So spices is categories where you have the most gainers. And then you have nuts at the other end, which I feel like, hopefully, I don't know where hazelnut is on that, Mike, but maybe we should look that one up too. Anything else you saw surprising here, Claire, in terms of this rank list?
I wouldn't say there was anything like shocking here. I do have a look at some of the gaining spices on the next. Someone did note for nuts, some of it is allergies. You don't put nuts in everything because it's kind of hard to take them out if they're a core flavor.
Yeah.
And then I did want to dig into those herbs and spices. If we say they're the top gainers, you're going to ask me, so what's gaining? That just makes sense. And we looked at this before in previous versions where we look at the early stage items. So these are my little favorites. I looked up how to say it in the menthe. Which is fenugreek and Indian cuisine. That's actually supposed to be a 0.7%. That's why it's a little funky on the font front. But these are the things that are under 1% penetration. But even these, I feel like we kind of recognize. Like if you do not know chili crisp, we've been talking about it for 4 or 5 years, maybe longer. That's certainly like these are not outrageously new spices that are gaining very quickly over the past 4 years. And then our later stages, these are also things that we've already talked about. We don't have a category for flowers, so lavender does fall to the herbs and spices. So those are ones that are kind of later stage, but are still showing a ton of growth. So here I did want to go, if we're thinking about innovation and who's adding those new things, I didn't really go into the menu example on the last page, but that's like a pretty much an independent size one. Independents are often where the trends come from. And chains are also, for many of us, our biggest customers or who we are. So it's nice to know how this looks differently from an operational size. So this is what it looked like 12 months ago, year ending Q2 2022. What were menu sizes for chains, regional, and independent? If you look at that long-term trend, you will see that chains had one of the largest reductions. They'd previously been the largest menus prior to COVID, and they fell the most. And they actually are continuing to reduce their menu size over the past 12 months. It's actually one of the few areas where they're, and yeah, in the comments, like it really shows like they saw the strategy, we reduced our menus. It actually really helped our bottom line. It helped our staff. We have trouble finding staff sometimes. It's really way better if we have less items and I do them well. I don't want you to mess up my core menu item. And so they're continuing to simplify and refine their menus, whereas independents who had typically had a little bit smaller menus are still recovering. And I think that speaks to realizing what else they can offer that maybe is different from a chain. I have all these different varieties. I can tweak them more because my staff is, in some cases, maybe been around a little bit longer. So those are things we're saying. I will say when I looked at the past 6-month growth, I saw a little bit of softening of the chain decline. So I think they're about to level off, and this is probably around where they'll settle off to.
Real quickly, Claire, just some growing stuff.
Yeah, so growing, and these are all, I picked the seedling because they're all teeny tiny seeds because these are things that are growing at independence, and I went to that tiny under 10%, but they all do make sense from a general thing. So pistao, I apparently had been mispronouncing that for a little bit, but pistao is a good one because it's, we're seeing lots of resurgence too. We were just talking about this in the office last week with the publication team, and Mike's team was refining their calendar of like new Greek restaurants, new Italian restaurants, new French restaurants, and so this one makes a lot of sense. It's very similar to pesto, but the French version, and it's allergen free because it almost never has dairy and very rarely has nuts. So lots of lifestyle options there. And this is my nectarine, which I realize I've talked about before. Nectarine is still showing a little bit of growth here. The growth in the number is from independent restaurants. Clearly, Yogurtland is not an independent restaurant, but it's a reminder that even if something is a teeny tiny trend just at independent restaurants, it doesn't mean you couldn't execute on it as a larger operation. There's ways it could make sense. And so this is an example of an LTO where it's something that isn't showing up, but like we have a gazillion flavors. Why not take a chance on a smaller seasonal flavor? And then our last 2 slides, because we promised info from every segment, I've got casual dining here. And this is some growing terms from casual dining specifically, including an example from very much not an Indian restaurant of an Indian dish. And you can see that split of what we were talking about of innovation while also going back to their basics. Lots of casual dining are Italian restaurants. So you've got like lemon cake, polenta cake. We see hints of plant-based with bean cake, regional US with Chow Chow. So you can see kind of all those big trends showing up.
And fine dining.
And last, but certainly not least, someone asked what the percents are on these slides. These are the 12-month penetration growth within that segment. So in this case, it's Bauer up 268% versus the prior year. So that's in a penetration standpoint. So this is another one where you see that kind of going back to some things we've done before, right? I feel like Spätzle every couple of years, and every time it's Oktoberfest, you see it pop up on menus. And here's Spätzle again showing up in this red wattle pork chop with Spätzle. So.
Claire, thank you for that. I'm going to pivot real quickly to just talk about menu pricing, which is a question we get about a lot of questions about. And maybe just show you, this is a chart we actually featured in the last webinar, and this is actually government data. Then I'll get in some of the Data Central data. This is, basically inflation numbers over the past couple of decades for at-home food in blue and for away-from-home food, restaurant food in pink. And if you look at this, you'll notice a couple of things. One, there's a lot more variation in the blue number. It's much more wild. It has higher highs, it has lower lows. It sometimes goes negative, which means you actually have periods of net deflation in food prices at the grocery store. You never go that low for restaurant food, though. You never go into negative territory, and the peaks and valleys tend to be much more subdued. And if you look at the past 18 months ago, actually almost 2 years or so, that we've had this sort of inflation surge, cumulatively, we've had more net inflation still in home food, grocery store food, than we have in restaurant food. So if you really want to get down to it, restaurant food has gotten comparatively relatively cheaper versus home food since the start of the inflation surge. Not by a ton anymore, because it's sort of caught up a little bit, but still it's gotten relatively comparatively cheaper compared to home food. And if we look at, we have an amazing data set where we collect every single price of every single item at every single location of each of the top major chains. So, every single Big Mac at every single McDonald's, we know that price. And the same thing repeats for every single other item on that chain's menu. And by having that, we could look at really tiny changes in menu prices over time, and we can cut the data in many, many, many super granular ways. So we could actually look at what inflation looks like from a month-over-month period on restaurant menus. And this is the monthly inflation rate that we see. That, March was a big inflation month. I'd say like the early part of the year was a little bit heavier inflation. But now that we've gotten into August, it seems to have subsided a little bit, that menu prices, at least at chain restaurants, are not advancing nearly as aggressively as they were at the beginning of the year. Now, of course, this is all very, very subject to change, depending on what happens with the economy and commodity prices and whatnot. But it looks like the price increases have started, at least at chains, to slow down a little bit. And one way you could think about this is something like a Big Mac nationwide has an average cost of $5.26. That's the average cost of a Big Mac across all the locations of McDonald's across the U.S. The cheapest Big Mac is about $3.50, and that's in a location in Wilburton, Oklahoma. The most expensive Big Mac is much, much more expensive. It's more than double the cost of the cheapest Big Mac. And those are 3 locations in Connecticut, all with the same pricing. So I think that one thing that we realize is there's pretty big price variance, even for a given item at a given chain. I mean, you could walk into one McDonald's and pay more than double what you would pay at another McDonald's. That we're very, very far from, let's say, uniform pricing across the country. You have a big, big price gap depending on where you happen to be. And we could actually look in our data, and we've sort of retabulated this at the zip code level, and look at, well, what are the most expensive places for chain food in the country? And these are the most expensive zip codes. I think the 10036 zip code, I think that actually covers Times Square in particular. You could see a lot of other New York zip codes on this list, a bunch of Hawaii, a bunch of Alaska, some Washington is in there too, a little bit of San Diego. But generally speaking, places you would expect to be more expensive, they are in fact more expensive. for chain food. The least expensive places look something like this. I guess we call these the most affordable places for chain food. And that, again, that premium number is what does it cost for food there at chain restaurants versus the national average price. So Brownsville, Texas, South Dallas, Fort Worth, there's a whole lot of Texas on this list of the most affordable places to get food from a chain, very distant than from what we saw in New York, Hawaii, Alaska. And one thing we can actually do here, which I think is really interesting, is we've plotted two things. One is the cost of living going up the y-axis. So this is sort of like the cost of living, everything, housing, food, goods, services, you name it, however the government defines house of living. And then menu premium from our own data. And we looked at this on a state level where each dot represents a different state. And you can sort of see that there's essentially a straight line relationship, right? As the cost of living goes up, the menu premium you would expect to pay in that particular state goes up as well. So that sort of makes sense. You have some outliers, right? You have places like DC and Massachusetts with a really high cost of living. Maybe it's driven by housing or something, but the menu premiums aren't that high. And then you have places like Alaska where the cost of living isn't so bad, but food at restaurants is super, super expensive. The bigger point, though, is that, other than those couple of outliers, there's a pretty consistent relationship, and the correlation between menu premium and cost of living is very high, 0.81, with 1 being the absolute theoretical highest correlation you could have. So cost of living and menu premium, they're well correlated. We then looked at our data, and we created for every single chain restaurant location among the top chains in the US a relative expensiveness index. So each one of these dots in this US map is a different restaurant chain location. Green means that its prices are substantially cheaper than other locations of that chain, and a red means that its prices are substantially more expensive than other locations of that chain. And when you look at this from like a total US perspective, it sort of makes sense, right? Like stuff on the West Coast is more expensive. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Like here, like sort of like that New York, area stuff is a little bit more expensive. Middle of the country tends to be less expensive. That seems to make sort of general intuitive sense. But when you start getting in a little bit closer, you start noticing something, right? Here you see Manhattan. Yes, it's all red. But the thing that was puzzling to us is, why are we seeing this other phenomenon? Let's go to maybe LA as an example, where you have green dots, cheap locations, right next door, literally right next door to a red dot. Why would you have a cheap McDonald's right across the street from an expensive Burger King? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that's one of the things that we learned as we explore this price data, is that there is a lot of wacky pricing at the store level. So we wanted to sort of explore this a little bit deeper. And if you remember sort of that thing that we saw with that gap between the most expensive and the cheapest Big Mac, well, we wanted to sort of do that for other chains as well. Each one of these dots on this chart represents a different chain restaurant. And looking at, let's say, a basket of items at that chain. So if you're a burger QSR, this might include like a burger, a fries, and a soda, and we sort of add all those prices up together. If you look at how expensive the most expensive store in that chain system is versus the cheapest, you get sort of a ratio, right? Is it 2 times more expensive, 1.5 times more expensive? That's the x-axis. That's what we call the price gap across stores. The other axis, we said, well, what if we plotted this against how franchised that chain is, the percentage of stores that are franchise locations? And what you see quite clearly is, as a chain becomes more franchised and you have many more franchisees making pricing decisions, as opposed to corporate making decisions for each and every store, you have much larger price variances and price gaps. I think this makes intuitive sense, right? We put the power of pricing in the franchisee, and we don't know for sure, is it maybe the franchisee is actually giving better pricing guidance than corporate could because they know the local market better. Maybe it's a case of franchisees gone wild and their pricing is just like way crazy and isn't considering the data. I think it's a little bit of both going on, but there is no question that as a chain becomes more franchised, its pricing becomes far more varied across locations. That might be good, that might be bad. It certainly has some level of inefficiency built into it. And we could see this in a little more greater detail. We've obscured the names over here because we don't want to share the specific names of those chains because some of them might not want that to be exposed. But you can look at these various chains that we have listed on the left, LSR chain or FSR chain, the percentage of all of its stores that are franchised, and then the level of price variability we see. And what you end up seeing is that as the level of franchising goes up, so does the level of price variability. So if you want stable pricing, having a heavily franchised system is usually not the way to do it. But what we really think is there's just opportunities to fix pricing at the store level, that it's not efficient right now. So store pricing often just doesn't make a lot of sense. I know I spoke a little bit fast over there. We have a ton of data around pricing. I would invite you to contact your Data Central rep, email me, whoever you want to reach out to. We could tell you a little bit more about it. But I would go back to just this one headline, which is at the store level, pricing on menus often just don't make sense. And there's a huge, huge opportunity to fix that inefficiency. Claire, Mike, I'm going to maybe just ramble for a couple of minutes with you guys. And if anyone is watching wants to stick on for another couple of minutes, you can. And I'll share some more thoughts on that. But I wanted to hopefully not go too far over. So if you have other appointments, go for it. If you don't, I will ramble about pricing for another couple of minutes. But Claire, thank you so much. Super informative as always. And Mike, thank you. Super inspirational as always.